the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Never underestimate the value of a known name when running for public office. An established family name becomes a brand that triggers loyalty, support, and votes. Think about the value of the political brands like Taft, Lucan, or Mallory. One of the races for Hamilton County Commission this year pits two people with names that are well known, proven vote getters, Deters and Driehaus. The context for this race is that Republicans currently have a 2-to-1 majority on the 3-person commission, with 2 of those seats before the voters this year. Todd Portune, the incumbent Democrat, is challenged by Republican Andrew Pappas. I interviewed them on October 9th, and that can still be viewed online at local12.com. This morning, we focus on the race between Dennis Deters, a Republican appointed to the vacant seat last January, and Democrat Denise Driehaus. Majority control of the commission could hinge on the outcome of this race. Dennis Deters, who I'm joined by right now, joined the commission last January, as I said, after Greg Hartman resigned from the commission. Before that, Mr. Deters served for 6 years as a trustee in Coleraine Township. He currently serves as the chair of the Hamilton County Heroin Coalition. He is a lawyer by profession. Denise Driehaus, a Democrat, currently is ending an 8-year term in the Ohio House of Representatives for the 31st District. She serves as the ranking member of the House Finance and Appropriations Committee. Prior to being elected to the Ohio House, Ms. Driehaus owned and operated 2 businesses. She serves on the board of the Sisters of Charity Ministry Foundation, and both of them actually serve on a number of boards in the community, but I thought those 2 were kind of interesting. Welcome to Newsmakers, both of you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Dan.
This is an important race, as I said, and it's important that we focus on it. One of the first issues I want to focus on actually is a complex issue, and that's the Metropolitan Sewer District. And there's a couple of different parts of this. One of the important issues dealing with the Metropolitan Sewer District is fulfilling the consent decree to rebuild the infrastructure of the sewer system, because what we are dealing with is lack of capacity, but also the problem of combined sewer overflows, CSOs, which allow stormwater to mix with sanitary sewers, which gets in hard to deal with, ultimately can get dumped into the Ohio River, and somebody has to treat it downstream. So we're under a consent decree. Denise, it's easy to for ratepayers to be angry about rising rates, and it's easy to play off of that, but don't we have to go through with this, and don't we have to be honest with the public about this is going to be costly, but we're replacing infrastructure that is several generations old?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have to do the work. I mean, that's, in the end, that's what we have to do. But there are ways to try to make sure that the impact is not so great by looking at ways to actually reduce the amount of money, or the amount of water that goes into the system. There are green infrastructure initiatives that are already going on where you try to capture the water upstream so it never gets into the system. And then there are some alternatives to green infrastructure down in the ground. South Fairmount is doing this right now.
Yes.
Yeah, where you daylight a stream instead of burying the pipes.
But that still has to be built.
True.
As part of this.
True, but there are ways to reduce costs by implementing some of the green initiatives that have come forward to say, look, we have to pay for this, but can we reduce the amount that the ratepayers actually have to pay? Okay. And the answer is yes, we can. And so I think the frustration is that the rates have tripled in the last 10 years, and some initiatives came forward with the task force in May. Some good, maybe some not to be accepted, but the idea that we're not looking at those aggressively and trying to move on those quickly has been my frustration.
Okay. Dennis?
Dan, the infrastructure work is the big piece that will cause the rates to rise in the future. And the control of how that work is done, frankly, at this point in time is with the city as the operator. And that's really where the problem is from a long-term standpoint. The county is not at the table with the EPA determining how these projects are done, determining how they're to be done efficiently, with a cost-effective perspective. That's why we're seeing, rates being out of control, because there's no real incentive for the city who's operating to want to drive those costs down, because ultimately it's the county who's making the decision and has to write the checks.
Well, that's a governance question, and I want to get at that. But do you agree that the work needs to be done, the infrastructure work has to be done, and it's very expensive to rebuild a sewer system that's this big and this complex?
Absolutely. It's important for our community to have a sustainable system that is environmentally safe. We're talking about wastewater, but I will tell you, at this point, from a governance standpoint, the people that are deciding how the bills are being paid and what the costs are going to be are not at the table with the EPA.
Okay, let's then talk about the governance question, because that's the second part of this. There's the physical part, but then there's the governance question. So what do you want to see to change? And the model that we're operating with now was signed in 1968. It runs out in 2 years during the term that one of you will be elected to. So what do you want to see as the new governing model?
The new governing model has to include a piece of accountability. That's the centerpiece of the system, where those that are determining how this work is being done, how the day-to-day operations are occurring, what kind of cost is being passed on to the ratepayer, the taxpayer, those people need to be accountable to the electorate and their representatives. Right now, it's the city.
What do you think that structure will be? Do you think it's just an adjustment in the combined city-county agreement, or is it creating a new local system? What?
I think that the elected officials and frankly the county who owns the system needs to be operating and being the owner of the system.
So moving the city out of the operations completely.
Correct, because at this point the city is not accountable to the residents of Hamilton County as it relates to operation and procurement.
Denise?
So my approach to this is more collaborative. The city and the county have joint assets in the system, and I think it would be very hard to divorce those assets, and never mind the employees that work for MSD are city employees with the city retirement. And so I think there are some complications in divorcing the relationship. The idea I've been talking about is more collaborative, bringing the city and the county together to say, we've had some trouble with the system, and we have had an audit, and there's another audit that's ongoing. We need to recognize some of the things that have gone wrong and correct those and be transparent about it. But in the end, we need a system that works moving forward. And so I did travel the state a number of months ago to try to look at other jurisdictions, other counties that are under a consent decree. Cuyahoga is one of them. Mm-hmm. And they have an independent board that has appointees from both the county and the city in recognition of those joint assets. And that independent board then has authority over MSD, kind of takes the politics out of it, and yet recognizes that the city and the county both have a role to play.
Before we get Dennis giving you a chance to respond to that idea, are we at this point talking about problems in the past in administration under Tony Parrott or whatever, or are we talking about ongoing problems? There's been a lot of changes at MSD, the way the city's running it under Gerald Checco. Are we talking about problems in the past, or are we talking about problems current?
Both. And the ultimate issue is that when the sewer system was being operated for the first 35, 40 years, everything was fine. When we got all this money that came into play to do the work, billions of dollars that will be spent, other interests aside from the ratepayers' interests and the taxpayers' interests, residents of the city and the county, were put at the bottom of the list. And that's currently happening.
What were the interests that were put at the top?
Special interests, patronage, in some ways.
Be specific.
Driving the interests of the public unions over the efficient operation of procurements, putting them in place, responsible bidder. Those things took the cost of these procurement operations, and in many cases, a third of the cost was increased because of that initiative and policy that was implemented by the operator. That's a massive concern.
Denise?
I think that things have improved under Gerald Checco pretty dramatically, and I think we are moving forward. But right now, the county is suing the city on this question, and so there's a lot of blaming going on, a lot of finger pointing going on, and so I think we're in a position now to say, look, we have to come to the table together, recognize that we've got these joint assets, and try to move forward together. And I don't see that happening right now on either side, and so that would be my approach. As you know, I've worked in a bipartisan way to get things done, so my approach is let's come together and stop, pointing fingers at one another.
I want to be clear. So, Dennis, are you saying that you believe that what ought to happen is the county ought to take over everything, both ownership and operations? Is that the solution?
I believe that a government entity that is accountable to the voters needs to take over, whether it's a city-county collaboration. Obviously, the city and the county have to work together. We have to be the adults in the room to recognize that we need to deliver a system for our kids. But at the end of the day, right now, those that are writing the checks are not accountable to the voters, and that's a massive concern, and that's why we're here today. One
of the problems is that this community hasn't got a good track record about working well regionally, and this seems to me that this is one of the areas on an important issue that we tried to, in 1968, put together a collaborative approach, and are we going to let that fall apart, I guess is the question. Can we ever work together as opposed to?
We have to.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying move it all over to the county. Or would you be
we're saying
open?
work together to be accountable to the voters. Right now, we are not.
Would Denise's idea of what exists in Cuyahoga with this unit that is created to govern,
right,
is that a possibility?
As long as that unit is accountable to the population of Hamilton County.
They wouldn't be elected, they would be appointed, right?
Right, well, they would be appointed by the elected, so appointed by both the city and the county. And the question, I think, is this a matter of structure? Or is it a matter of personalities? I mean, we talk about this a lot when it comes to government. Is some of the dysfunction a matter of the people or the structure? And I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Sometimes you wonder, it's probably a little bit of both in this situation. So if the structure were to change to recognize the union of the city and the county, and the individuals were to change, that would bring a more collaborative approach to this, I mean, I think that would make a world of difference.
I want to move on to one other issue here. And that is the whole question of the heroin opiate epidemic, which is rampant. We've seen it this summer with, dozens and dozens of people hit by a bad batch that got into this community. Both of you, in your own context prior to this, have done things and taken action on this area. I know you're both interested and concerned about this. So Dennis, let's start with you. What would you say are the, one or two things moving forward you'd like to see the county do to try to help address this?
Well, the county's actively moving rather quickly with the Heroin Coalition, which I chair. We've made tremendous strides in looking at our systems, the court system, our public safety systems. How do we do things different? Because what we traditionally do with heroin is not working. What we traditionally do with other problems. So ultimately, the coalition is looking at new solutions. I've been saying since I've been on the coalition, this is a healthcare problem first and foremost. We need to have our hospital systems, our doctors lead on this. The coalition has brought UC Health and other hospital systems to the fold. I've seen tremendous progress as it relates to the approach to this issue and recognizing that it is a public health issue.
Is there something you'd point to that you think really is working, that you think there's an approach that you really like?
Well, I point to the quick response teams that we first developed in Corrine Township, which take police officers and firefighters out of their traditional role and connect people with treatment. A lot of times when it comes to getting someone help and pulling the demand off the street, as it relates to heroin, it involves a human connection. Most of the people that connect with these police officers in Corrine Township with the quick response teams in Norwood now and countywide, they're saying, you're the first person that really cared about my issue. And that's a massive step away from what a traditional police role would be, and I think that that's an important step.
Denise, what would you do? What would be your top priorities in addressing this issue as a county commissioner?
Yeah, so a couple things. So as a state rep, you're right, we've worked on this at the legislature for a number of years in a bipartisan way, pass a bill to make sure that kids understand the dangers of opioids and heroin in the classroom. That's already been enacted. The Good Sam bill recently became law. That is now in place, and so I was very proud to author both of those. We also have some resources coming down from the state to expand beds. The Cat House is the good example of that in the West End. So things have happened, but it's not enough. And you are right that the county needs to take a very active role in this. We do have a project, it's a pilot program that's going on in the jail right now. It's a recovery pod of women that have been segregated from the rest of the population.
In the Justice Center.
In the Justice Center, because remember that these folks are detoxing. Many of them are addicted when they come into the facility. They're detoxing in the facility and moving right back out. So oftentimes they use again, they move right back in. And so it's not only inefficient, but it doesn't help those individuals. And so the idea is to segregate them, to provide some support there so that when they do move out of the Justice Center, there is a support system in place to give them a fighting chance. And the woman that runs this program called me, it's been now about a month ago, and Charmaine called and said, I want you to know that one of the women that was involved in this, as soon as she got out, called her peer support person to say, I am terrified. I am going back to the place that got me in trouble to begin with. And so she was relying on that peer support to help her.
This long-term treatment is, because this isn't just solved by detoxing and release, and there's a lot of that. And I think there's, whether it's the Cat House or First Step Home, there are models there, but they're going to take investment, they're going to take support, and this is going to be a tough one that the county, the city have to take a lead on, and it's going to be, there's no simple solution.
Well, in the state,
state.
There is a mid-biennial review going through in lame duck. We are offering to add resources to that bill to bring some local dollars to the issue.
Okay, I have to take a break, but stay right there. You stay right there too. Right after the break, Denise and Dennis will be back and we can talk about some more issues. Welcome back. I'm joined this morning by Denise Driehaus and Dennis Deters, the candidates for one of the two seats on the Hamilton County Commission that is on the November 8th ballot. Okay, Denise just mentioned the Justice Center and the program in the Justice Center. One of the issues, though, around the Justice Center is ongoing, complex, and it raises a larger issue about the role of the commissioners in setting budgets. On the one hand, there's not enough jail space. The sheriff, whether it's Jim Neal or Simon Lees, has had to keep releasing people. The sheriff always wants more money. That puts pressure on the budget, and whether he's running over and all of that kind of stuff. So what does what can you tell people about the role of the commission in really being able to set budgets and hold these independently elected people to a budget that maybe the average person doesn't understand, because the commission is a different kind of body than I think sometimes people understand. Dennis, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's important that the commission take the lead on their philosophy, and currently the county's philosophy is to live within your means, and recognizing the importance of an open dialogue between our budget office and the individual electeds. I think that under my watch that has been a positive thing. There's a lot of things in government, and you look at the different departments, you look at the sheriff's office, but you also look at juvenile court. It's not apples to apples. They're dealing with different funding mechanisms, very complex issues. Broad brush, yeah, we all have to live within our means, but it's such a complex, challenging, operation. You have to work hard to make sure that we're all on the same page as it relates to budgets.
Have you been surprised at how complex it is?
Well, no, I haven't, but I do understand. I do understand that it takes hard work to make sure that we can keep everybody on the right page.
Denise, what about both the Justice Center and as an example of budget control?
Well, I think budgets are investments. in my view. I'm the ranking member on finance, and when we create a budget, it's not about spending so much as it is about investing in what matters and what can make us more efficient. And so this idea of this recovery pod that I just gave is an efficient way to address an issue of overcrowding in the jail. If you can keep people from re-entering, then there's an efficiency there beyond helping that individual. And so there are ways to address and invest that I think we should look at as county commissioners. And the sheriff is not the only one, by the way, that goes over budget. The prosecutor goes over budget. You know, this is a matter of, when you set a budget, it's aspirational. It's in looking into the future. We need to hold folks that run over year after year accountable for that, and then budget accordingly instead of having that happen, because that money's coming from somewhere. If somebody's getting extra money, you're taking it from somewhere else. And so I feel as though we need to get a whole lot better at holding people to their budgets and being realistic about what those budgets should look like year after year.
Another issue that's out there right now is an issue that sort of impacts parts of the county and sort of communities and neighborhoods in the city, and that is the proposal by the Duke Energy Company to put in a high-pressure natural gas pipeline. And so there's been a lot of pushback in the neighborhoods, in certain neighborhoods, on this. And so what's the role of the commission in moderating and making sure that all works out? Denise, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, well, I think the county commission and the state representatives have a real role in making sure that the residents are heard on this, and that's what we have done. And I think Dennis and I would agree on this, that we had an issue. Residents, in solidarity with one another, said we don't agree to any of these three routes because they're all in densely populated residential areas. And so together we are going to stand against all of them. And so we asked for public hearings. We had a hybrid of what was okay, but it really wasn't the robust public hearing that we had all hoped for. And so now it's pared down to two routes. Duke has reduced the size of the pipe. It's okay, but it's still not what we need in this community. And so I'm against the current proposition, but also trying to keep track of what's going on with the siting board, because that's ultimately now where the
which is on the state level.
That's right. And so I have a role in that, obviously. And so I have talked to the individual from the House that sits on the siting board, but beyond that, made sure that the community understands what the opportunity now is for engagement, because there's a meeting coming, and it will be a local meeting to make sure that people can be heard.
Dennis?
The county has an obligation to represent the community, and there was a huge outcry as it relates to this pipeline project. As soon as we engaged, along with the rest of the commission, we agreed that we should intervene to have a seat at the table. The procedure is through the state's siting board, but the county can have a seat at the table, and we can represent the communities that will be affected by this. You know, we opposed it, and we believe that it's something that Duke can spend more money.
So this is an issue that actually the two of you are probably pretty much on the same place?
I would say yes.
I would say
You would
yes.
say yes. That's nice. It's nice to hear. I want to end up with something. I started out by talking about the value of family brands. You, both of you, are well-known names, to put it mildly, in this. Growing up, Dennis, let's start with you. Growing up in a family where your older brother, significantly older than you, Joe, who's also on the ballot this time, not that anybody doesn't know that, and Denise, your father, I knew Don, just one of the leaders of the Democratic Party. Your brother, you're both come from political families. How has that shaped you in terms of the way you think about public service and elected office? So, Dennis?
Well, you can start with my grandfather, who was Dan Tehan. That's where it all began.
Oh, really?
My
I didn't
family.
pull that.
A Democrat sheriff.
Oh, yeah.
But
Did you support him? No.
I did. I did. Dan the man. Following his model and the model of my brother. Growing up significantly younger than him, I think you hold them to high esteem, but you also recognize what they're doing. And I think he and my grandfather both have a career that's marked by quality public service, where representing the community and doing what's right is paramount, and that's what's shaped me.
And I'm glad you brought up my dad. We were just looking at a picture earlier this morning that my brother posted going into Election Day. It's a black and white photo. It's from 1968 when my dad ran for Congress, way back in the day. Only 6 of the 8 of us are alive, and so we're in the photo.
That was my first involvement with politics in 1968.
That was an interesting year too. That was an interesting year. But anyway, so we're there. We're in red, white, and blue. We've got styrofoam hats on with bumper stickers across the front, and we drove around in the family station wagon with a bullhorn on the top, singing songs about my dad running for Congress. So I was 5. This is my experience, and my dad did it with such exuberance and such joy, and felt like this is what we could do to give back. So it's all about public service, and so that's kind of where I come from.
I'm out of time. Dan Tehan was sort of that same personality.
Democrat.
But he had that sort of open personality. To find out more about these candidates, check out their websites at DeniseDriehaus.com, all run together, and DennisDeters.com. Actually, they parallel each other. Thank you both for being here. This past week, I've talked to a number of Ohio voters who voted early, and one of their comments was, "It's a long ballot. Use all of your rights as a voter and as a citizen." And watch us on Tuesday night for the best coverage from the Board of Elections. Have a good week.